Hello everyone, welcome to Spoken Word Sunday with Granddaddy G. Tonight is a special edition of Spoken Word Sunday called Happy Thanksgiving. I would like to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and hope you enjoy it. Be sure to give thanks for all the good things in your life, thanks to God. In the second half of the word giving, the more you give, the more you get back. So be sure to give as much as you can to all your loved ones. This is from thoughtco.com. I'm going to read poems about Thanksgiving from some of the greatest poets of all time, put together by thoughtco.com, Bob Holman and Marjorie Snyder. And here's a little information about Thanksgiving. The story of the first Thanksgiving is a familiar one to all Americans. After a year filled with suffering and death, in the fall of 1621, the Pilgrims at Plymouth had a feast to celebrate a bountiful harvest. This feast is surrounded by legends of the local Native Americans joining in the celebration, and tables of turkey, corn, and some form of cranberry dish. These foods are the bedrock of the traditional American Thanksgiving dinner, celebrated on the fourth Thursday of November. It was not an official holiday until President Abraham Lincoln declared it so in 1863, although it was unofficially celebrated before that time by many Americans. It is a time for families gathered together to reflect on all the good things of their lives, and an appropriate moment to read eloquent poems to mark the holiday and its meaning. The first poem is called The New England Boys' Song About Thanksgiving Day. It's by Lydia Maria Child. This poem, more commonly known as Over the River and Through the Wood, was written in 1844 and depicts a typical holiday journey through New England snow in the 19th century. In 1897, it was made into the song that is more familiar than the poem to Americans. It very simply tells the story of a sleigh ride through the snow, the dapple gray horse pulling the sleigh, the howling of the wind and the snow all around, and at last arriving at grandmother's house, where the air is filled with the smell of pumpkin pie, one of my favorite smells. It is the maker of the images of a typical Thanksgiving. The most famous words are the first stanza. Over the river and through the wood, to grandfather's house we go. The horse knows the way to carry the sleigh through the white and drifted snow. Next one's called The Pumpkin by John Greenleaf Whittier. John Greenleaf Whittier uses grandiose language in The Pumpkin from 1850 to describe in the end his nostalgia for Thanksgivings of old and bounteous love for pumpkin pie, one of my favorite pies, the enduring symbol of those holidays. The poem begins with strong imagery of pumpkins growing in a field and ends as an emotional ode to his now elderly mother enhanced by similes. I can picture him and his elderly mother at the table with his mouth full. And the prayer which my mouth is too full to express swells my heart that thy shadow may never be less, that the days of thy lot may be lengthened below, and the frame of thy worth like a pumpkin vine grow, and thy life be as sweet as its last sunset sky, golden tinted and fair as thy own pumpkin pie. Nice tribute to his mother's pumpkin pie. This one is from one of my favorite poets, Emily Dickinson. It's called Number 814, I guess number 814. As I mentioned in another episode of Spoken Word Sunday, Emily Dickinson wrote over 1,800 poems in her lifetime, but only 12 were published. And those poems that were published were found after her death by her sister. So I guess she probably did like I do, don't title the poem, so the sister probably just numbered them. This is number 814. And another thing about Emily Dickinson that I have in common with her is that she lived her life almost entirely isolated from the rest of the world, rarely leaving her home in Amherst, Massachusetts, or receiving visitors except for her family. Her poems were not known to the public in her lifetime. The first volume of her work was published in 1890, 4 years after her death. So, it's impossible to know when a particular poem was written. This poem about Thanksgiving in characteristic Dickinson style is obtuse in its meaning, but it implies that this holiday is as much about memories of previous ones as about the day at hand. I certainly enjoy my memories of childhood Thanksgiving as I come from a large family, always a house full of people. And I'm trying to avoid having the same thing happen to me that happened to Emily Dickinson by sharing my original poems here on YouTube. So thank you for supporting my channel. 814 by Emily Dickinson. One day is there of the series, termed Thanksgiving Day, celebrated part at table, part in memory. Yes, memories of the holidays are very important to us all. This next one is called Fire Dreams by Carl Sandburg. Fire Dreams was published in Carl Sandburg's 1918 volume of poetry, Cornhuskers, for which he won the Pulitzer Prize in 1919. He is known for his Walt Whitman-like style and use of free verse. Sandburg writes here in the language of the people, directly and with relatively little embellishment, except for a limited use of metaphor, giving this poem a modern feel. He reminds the reader of the first Thanksgiving, conjures up the season, and gives his thanks to God. The most important thanks we can give is to God. Here's the first stanza. I remember here by the fire, in the flickering reds and saffrons, they came in a ramshackle tub, pilgrims in tall hats, pilgrims with iron jaws, drifting by weeks on beaten seas. And the random chapters say they were glad and sang to God. The last one is called Thanksgiving Time, and it's by one of my favorite poets, Langston Hughes, who I consider to be the first hip-hop artist, first spoken word poet from the 1920s. So he deserves a beat. Langston Hughes, famous as a seminal and hugely important influence on the Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s, wrote poetry, plays, novels, and short stories that shed a light on the Black experience in America. This ode to Thanksgiving from 1921 invokes traditional images of the time of year and the food that is always part of the story. The language is simple, and this would be a good poem to read at a Thanksgiving with children gathered around the table. So maybe we'll try that this year. Ready, children? Here's the first stanza. When the night winds whistle through the trees and blow the crisp brown leaves a-crackling down, a-crackling down. When the autumn moon is big and yellow, orange and round, orange and round. When old Jack Frost is sparkling on the ground, it's Thanksgiving time. It's Thanksgiving time. It's Thanksgiving time. Thank you, everybody. Happy Thanksgiving. I'll see you next Sunday.